while the world's eyes are on the catastrophe in the Gaza Strip. The New Yorker recently interviewed an Israeli human rights activist and uncovered Israel's quiet plan in another part of Palestine, the West Bank. Hagai El-Ad, a former director of the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, says that for years, Israel's goal has been to completely cleanse Palestinian communities from the West Bank. He says Israel has placed West Bank Palestinians in a coercive environment that is designed to push Palestinians to eventually give up on living amidst the constant pressures imposed on them by settlers and the Israeli army, and instead abandon the area of their own accord. El-Ad says, what has happened since October 7th is an escalation of this process. The Israeli state, through its settlers, is trying to take advantage of the fact that all eyes are on Gaza and is intensifying dramatically the pressure on Palestinian communities. Israel systematically harasses Palestinian communities living in the West Bank and deprives them of access to water, electricity connection, and basic services. All these mechanisms of harassment and deprivation are supported by Israeli courts and legal system. The violence applied by settlers is one of those tools that helps the government in this goal. Some may be tempted to distinguish between bad settlers and the Israeli government, but this misguided view overlooks an important reality. Eradicating Palestinian communities throughout the West Bank is not a project limited to settlers, whether good, bad, or otherwise. This is a project being pursued by the Israeli government itself, and has been documented for years by Palestinian, Israeli, and international human rights organizations. If Palestinians attempt to defend themselves from settler violence, they risk imprisonment or even armed attack under the false pretexts of being terrorists. Creating a coercive environment instead of forcefully displacing Palestinians is more beneficial for the Israeli government, as they balance the long-term goal of expelling Palestinians from the West Bank with the need to minimize the costs to their international reputation in a day and age when the sudden forced displacement of a native people will not sit well with most of the world. The displacement of Palestinians from the West Bank and the growth of illegal Israeli settlements are two processes that go hand in hand. This situation is not limited to Netanyahu or his ministers, and is an Israeli project that has been expanding since 1967 during the leadership of left, right, and centrist governments. Differences in approach are noticeable from one decade to another, and sometimes from one government to another. But even right-wing governments, in the face of international pressure, often take a step back for a month or two until the world's attention is drawn elsewhere, then they speed up again. This is how Israel has been able to create more than 250 settlements and more than 750,000 settlers in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. That being said, tensions have intensified even more than usual under the current Netanyahu government. Hagai El-Ad concludes that although there are international institutions that are trying to prevent the exacerbation of this humanitarian disaster, the displaced people of the West Bank are almost never able to return to their land, and are instead usually forced to move to other Palestinian villages. This is exactly the situation that Israelis want. Israeli officials and Jewish settlers openly tell Palestinians that they have no future in the West Bank. As Israel gradually pushes West Bank Palestinians towards Gazification by besieging them in a shrinking territory, visitors to the big Palestinian cities like Hebron, Jenin, or Ramallah clearly see this unfolding before their eyes.